Hello everyone, my name is SilverContrail, and boy, this has been a really exciting week leading up to YCS Chicago. We finally got the new TCG Forbidden and Limited list, and with it, we kind of need to rethink some stuff. The list is pretty short, and I've heard a lot of complaints so far that players aren't liking the extent to which certain decks weren't hit. It's a very minimalistic list, and that has a lot to do with just how short this upcoming format is. Remember, it's only 2.5 months. It's not the full 3 months. The fact that we only have 2.5 months before the national season begins, so it's not surprising to see a very small list that's not. It doesn't have a lot in it, but I do think a lot of players, maybe justly so, a little bit upset. They're really not looking forward to the upcoming Prio format, to the upcoming format with artifacts and Madolche and all sorts of craziness with BUJIN. But at least for now, I think this list is going to be pretty strong. It balances out Fire Fist, it balances out MERMAIL, and it also hits a couple of other decks which may or may not have needed to be hit. Things like Infernity, things like Laval, things like Fire Kings, all getting hit pretty hard. But ultimately, I think we'll see this as being a good deck, or a good list. There are a couple of decks, again, that get balanced out a little bit. Erratics get balanced, again, Fire Fist and MERMAIL get balanced, and in the wake of those cards being limited, so we see WOLFBARK and Gundi going to 1. In the wake of that, there's a lot of decks that now have a really good opportunity to make a showing, and I think you'll see a lot of people jump from MERMAIL and Fire Fist to these decks, and we're going to start seeing them pop up a little bit more. So I want to talk about 3 decks in particular. The first one being HARPIES. HARPIES won YCS Sao Paulo, that's in Brazil, and it was played by Carlos Henrique. His build was really interesting, and I think it's definitely something that we're going to see more of in the future. He played triple Upstart, triple Reckless Greed, triple Pot of Duality, and 2 card cards to really just maximize the consistency of the Harpie deck, and it worked for him. It was very successful. In fact, there was another Harpie deck that played a fairly different build. I think it still played the Upstarts, and basically, this deck, the one that Enrique played, it's really strong. It's got a lot of consistency. It's got a lot of good matchups. The Harpie deck has a very, very strong side deck. It can play a lot of things in there, things like Dimensional Fissure, which, looking at Fire Fist, that really might not be an option anymore. If they do jump to 3.5 axis and stuff like that, where you really do want to have a developed graveyard more often than not. Harpies can play a lot of the banishing cards because they're not really that concerned about their graveyard, with the exception of Hysteric Party, which is clearly a game ender, and the Hysteric Sign, so they don't play macro for obvious reasons. But otherwise, this is a really strong deck. Again, it's got some really good cards in the extra deck. It has access to 101 and access to Knight. It has access to Lightning Chidori, which is a great problem solver. It's got access to Ice Beast Zero Fiend, one of the best problem solvers in the game. I mean, blanket negation of your opponent's cards, other face-up cards, is devastating, especially against a deck like Noble Knights. You can shut off all of their equipped spells and their monsters' effects, and then just run it over, while you have this Ice Beast that has just suddenly gone over 3,000 attack and remains at that attack until, I believe it's the end of your opponent's next turn. So Harpies are really strong, and I really think that if players actually go and play and they experiment with it a little bit, they'll find that it's maybe more consistent than they thought before, and well worth playing. Again, it's got some really good matchups too. The other deck that is probably going to make a comeback, and this is somewhat unsurprising, is Geargia. Geargia saw a lot of play, especially the Geargia Karakuri variants, but I don't think we're going to see too much of the Karakuri side of it. We could, it definitely could, but I think pure Geargia actually isn't really that bad, and Luke Freely recently topped a regional, I think it was on March 1st, in New Jersey, with a pure Geargia deck, so no Karakuris in there, And again, this is a really nice deck that plays well into a format where WOLFBARK isn't everywhere, and where MERMAILs are a little bit nerfed, and as well as Heretics being a little bit nerfed, because those are really its bad matchups. Any deck that can play aggressively over its sets is gonna cause problems. So Geargia is really strong at playing defensively until it needs to go off, and then it plays a bunch of these really dangerous Xyz monsters, generating a ton of advantage really quickly, very easily churning out rank 4s, and now that WOLFBARK's at 1, it does it much, much, much faster than Fire Fist do, and more consistently as well. Pure Geargia there's a lot to be said for this deck, and I think it's well worth experimenting with over the Karakuri version, and like Harpies, it's got some really solid matchups. It's a pretty strong deck, and probably going to see more of it, coming up. If we do see Karakuri, I won't be surprised if that happens to be what players go to because they're more familiar with it, because it's got an OTK. For whatever reason, if players just go, yeah, I don't really want to run Pure Geargia because it doesn't OTK people. If that does happen, then certainly, sure, people are going to probably go ahead and jump all over the Karakuri side of things. And we might, and I say this, we might, and very cautiously saying this, see pure Karakuri show up again. I don't know for sure if we will, but it's possible. But yeah, that's those are two of the decks that I think could definitely come back. And then the third is, and I've been talking about this deck for a while, and then of course it tops the Las Vegas ARG Circuit Series, and that's BUJIN. BUJIN are interesting because they've had pretty okay performance, but it hasn't been anything too exciting. Now they're the deck that has triple tanky and nothing hit in it, and that's pretty interesting because they weren't playing WOLFBARK, so that's totally the realm of Fire Kings that are being hit. Now they have the triple tanky. They're better than Fire Fist, in my opinion. Whether or not you agree with that, that's fine. Joey Chow, of course, won the Las Vegas Circuit Series with BUJIN, and it just has a really, really solid play style and a lot of outs to a lot of things. It's the toolbox deck of the future, which is what Konami has created. The decks that have all of their outs in themed form, and they're all searchable. The deck has an infinite number of outs to everything, it seems like, and it's all themed. And along with that, spellbooks being somewhat similar, I think, is having effectively themed removal that solves every problem in the game. But BUJIN, I think, are a little bit more consistent. Certainly, spellbooks, they're very consistent, but they're a little bit more punishing if you make the wrong play. BUJIN play themselves just a little bit more. They're certainly not autopilot, but it is definitely something that players need to be concerned with, especially when they're going into a large tournament. And the other thing too is with the side deck, BUJIN are very easy to side against. They have a lot of weaknesses, stuff like Light-Imprisoning Mirror, stuff like Debunk. Very dangerous cards for them to play against. Zombie World, it's another option. And I don't know if we're going to see too much Light-Imprisoning Mirror because Heretics getting hit a little bit. If people do drop that deck, we might not see Imprisoning Mirror as much. And it depends. But if players start dropping their side deck cards for MERMAIL or for Fire Fist, and they start dedicating more and more side deck cards to the BUJIN matchup, then that's a problem. And I think definitely on the tournament scene, the amount of cards that people are siding for a deck makes a huge, huge difference. You will see decks that simply do not change over time, and they'll go from 1 month not topping at all to another month topping a bunch, and it's entirely because more people sided for a deck, or sided for a different deck, and that let other ones sort of propagate to the top of the top 16s of these events. And it happens all the time. It's super easy to just watch happen, but we'll see if that's what ends up occurring. It's really too early to tell at this point. And even this is something that can change on a weekly basis, really. Week in, week out. What's winning at the regionals is going to determine what gets sided for at the next regional, and that really does make all the difference. Honestly, I think players would be surprised the influence that siding for a deck actually has on the format. But I've gotten off topic. Again, I think Harpies, Yugioh, BUJIN, these are going to be 3 really big decks next format. We're going to see a little bit less of Fire Fist, particularly less in their current form, and a little bit less of MERMAIL as they kind of reconfigure themselves. It's a very malleable deck, MERMAIL, so we'll probably see them come back in some form. But yeah, these are all decks, again, that are doing okay right now. They haven't done amazing yet, but I think they're about to do amazing. So before Primal Origins format, expect to see these 3 decks popping up quite a bit. But anyways, yep, that's it from me. Thank you for watching, and until